Hey everybody, what I've got here is Lionel's new 3-rail O-scale 060 steam locomotive in the form of Strasburg number 31, and we're going to check it out right now, right this instant on Eric's Trains. Alright, Strasburg 31. I believe this is the second Strasburg locomotive that Lionel has offered in the last 2 or 3 years, the other one being number 90. And oddly, even though number 90 was cataloged first, number 31 has arrived ahead of number 90. But I don't think number 90 is far behind. In fact, when Chris from RBP Trains and I were up at Lionel in December, we actually got to see a working prototype of number 90 that was really cool.
Oh, that's right, your ghost whistle. Where'd you have your box 3?
But anyway, Strasburg 31, it's an 060 locomotive. Now, the 060 design has origins going all the way back to the 1850s. In terms of the history of Strasburg 31, rather than taking notes and potentially making a mistake, I'm just going to pretty much read you verbatim the history that they've got on the Strasburg website. And so, boys and girls, our number 31 locomotive. In the summer of 1960, the Strasburg Railroad acquired Canadian National Locomotive number 7312, a steam engine built by Philadelphia's Baldwin Locomotive Works in 1908. Number 7312, later renumbered as number 31, spent nearly 50 years of service on the Grand Trunk Railway and its later merged conglomerate, that's hard to say, Canadian National Railway before coming to the Strasburg Railroad in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. It was the first steam locomotive to run at Strasburg Railroad after the company divested itself of its steam locomotives in the 1920s. When number 31 pulled her first passenger train on September 1st, 1960, she was the first steam locomotive returned to passenger service in the United States. Saving the locomotive from the scrap heap and putting it back into passenger service was a huge accomplishment for the Little Strasburg Railroad. It is the second oldest locomotive on the company's roster. Since 2009, number 31 has been under an extensive rebuild in conjunction with the Federal Railroad Administration's mandatory 1,472-day, 15-year inspection cycle. Now, over the last 2 or 3 years, Strasburg has been saying they're trying to get number 31 rebuilt as quickly as possible, especially since number 90 is due to go down for its inspection cycle pretty soon. Now, back to this model, Lionel offered this latest version of the 060 steam locomotive in their 2022 Volume 1 catalog, and these were delivered in late 2022 around November or December. Including Strasburg, they did 7 different road names. They had Strasburg, of course, Bethlehem Steel, Frisco, New York Central, Pensy, Terminal Railroad Association of St. Louis, and Washington Terminal Railroad. By the numbers, the 060 has a total length of 17.5 inches. The combined weight of the locomotive and the tender is 6 pounds 4 ounces. When tested, this locomotive produced 1 pound 10 ounces of pulling power, which is actually pretty good for something this small. And speaking of being small, the minimum required curve needed to operate this locomotive is 031. Feature-wise, this model has pretty much everything you'd expect from a high-end Lionel steam locomotive these days. So you've got legacy command, legacy rail sounds, Bluetooth, fan-driven smoke for the smokestack, electro couplers on both ends, LED lighting, a firebox glow, and a lighted cab interior. But there's a couple sort of standout features that I want to talk about for just a moment. So as cataloged, the 060 did not have any extra smoke features other than the smokestack itself. So it didn't have whistle steam or cylinder steam, and it didn't even have anything like the swinging bell. It had none of that. And so that was certainly unusual for a modern Lionel high-end steam locomotive. Usually at the very least they have whistle steam, but like I said, this had none of that. And so when I saw it in the catalog, I thought, well, wow, this really doesn't offer much. It just has one smoke unit for the smokestack, and in this day and age, that's kind of quaint. Now, when I talked to Ryan at Lionel when we were going over this catalog, he explained to me there was a good reason why they didn't add whistle steam, and that was because the boiler is simply not large enough to add a second smoke unit. And if you think about it, he's got a good point. I mean, the motor probably comes out to about right here. Then you've got the circuitry for the motor driver board, the LED lighting, and the one smoke unit, and then you've got the smoke unit itself. So very little room in there for a lot of extra stuff. But nevertheless, when I saw it, I thought, well, it's $800, I could spend that money on another locomotive that does have whistle steam and other advanced features like that. And so initially I passed on ordering one of these. And I guess apparently other people felt the same way as I did, and maybe they didn't get a lot of orders for this thing. And so after it was cataloged and after everyone had put in their orders, they kind of went back to the drawing board, and I think they probably said, what can we do to add a little extra value to this thing? And so they were able to just barely squeeze in the swinging bell effect into the locomotive. So it doesn't have whistle steam, but it now has the swinging bell effect, which to me is super cool. So yeah, kudos to Lionel for finding a way to fit the swinging bell effect into this tiny boiler. It certainly makes it a lot better and adds a whole lot of extra play value, if you will. The other standout feature that I want to talk about is the tether between the locomotive and the tender. Now these days, most high-end Lionel steam locomotives use a wireless infrared tether system to allow the electronics in the locomotive to communicate with the electronics in the tender and vice versa. Lionel's been using the wireless infrared tether system for many, many years. It's rock solid and it always works great. In fact, I can't ever remember having an issue with their wireless tether system, unlike Unlike the MTH so-called wireless drawbar system, which can be, shall we say, a little more temperamental at times, but that's a discussion for another day. Anyway, the 060 here does not use the wireless infrared tether system. Instead, it uses a physical wired tether between the locomotive and the tender. Now, most of the time these days, that would be frowned upon because nobody wants an unsightly wire tether between the two, but in this case, it's actually a good idea, and it has to do with the nature of O-gauge switches and the small size of the locomotive. So for those of you who don't know, all 3-rail O-gauge switches, unless they've been custom modified, usually have a spot where you've got no center rail power, and they have to do that so that there's no short as the train goes through the switches. Now, on a large locomotive like a 484 Northern, you've got maybe 3 or 4 pickups spread out over maybe 8 or 9 inches, and so the chances of all 4 of those pickup rollers being on a dead spot in a switch at the same time is pretty slim. But on a small locomotive like this, you've got 2 pickup rollers and they're within a span of maybe 2 or 3 inches because you've only got these 3 small drivers. And so the chance of both of these pickup rollers being on a dead spot in a switch at the same time is much higher. So the solution to that is to add more pickup rollers. Well, you can't add more to the locomotive, but you can borrow the pickup rollers on the tender. It has 2 pickup rollers of its own. So if you wire them together, now you've got 4 pickup rollers in a span of 14 inches, which is much more stable. So in this case, having a wired connection is a good idea, and Lionel has done this on other small locomotives in the past. When they did the B6B a couple years ago, that had a wired tether because that's a very small switcher. And also the upcoming 040 that I think is coming out later this year, that's even tinier than this, and that has a tether as well. All right, going in for a few close-up shots. Here's the front of the locomotive. We've got some nice yellow paint down on the steps, got a few hoses and a coupler cut bar. Now, unlike most O-scale locomotives where you've got a dummy O-scale coupler on the front, we have a fully functional electro coupler, and that means this thing will be good for switching activities. Above that, we've got some grab irons, and we've got a little Strasburg 31 plate below the operating headlight, and then we've got lighted number boards up top. And check out those itty-bitty drive wheels. To put that in perspective, here's a quarter. Yeah, they're pretty small. I really like this spot on the 060 because there's so much stuff going on. We got the bell, the whistle, there's a little wire going from the whistle back to the cab. We got handrails, safety valves, a dynamo, piping and valves over here, and then we've got opening vents on the roof of the cab. I also really like these cab windows. They look great and they open. Let's see if I can get it to slide. There we go. Like that. And of course there's one of the 2 hand-painted crew figures inside the cab. The gap between the locomotive and the tender looks pretty good, and we've got this nice drop plate between the two. Down here is the drawbar, and then here is that wired tether that I was talking about. Now when it comes time to separate the locomotive and the tender, you just lift up on the drawbar here, pull it out, and the tether should come out with it. And there's the end of the wired tether. Looking into the cab, we can't see much, but if I shine a light in there, you can see it's a pretty nicely detailed backhead. And then we've got those nice curtains around the door. And we've also got some yellow grab irons on either side. And some clear plastic windows in the back as well. And when it's time to reconnect the locomotive and the tender, I like to bring it in and connect the tether first. And this is going to be a trick because I got to do this with the camera between me and the locomotive. Connect it like that. There we go. And then bring up the drawbar. Set it down, make sure the plate's in place. And there we go. And then finally on the top of the tender, we've got the water hatch that opens up like that. There is nothing underneath, however. And then we can also remove the coal pile to reveal the master controls for the locomotive. Now when you take this off, be very careful because there's a couple wires going up here to the legacy antenna. So if you pull it off with too much force, it might break those wires. Anyway, we've got the run program switch, the Bluetooth switch, and the smoke unit on-off switch. And then when you're done, just tuck the wires back in, and there we go. All right, the last thing we're going to do before we start this thing up is BFIMO. Best feature in my opinion, well, that's a no-brainer this time around. It's definitely the swinging bell effect. Okay, now comes the fun part. Let's start this thing up.
Train 1 brakeman, let's get an application for continuity test. Good application, okay to release. Train 1 brakeman, we have good set, good release, good continuity on timetable train number 1. Over.
That's a roger. Good set, good release, good continuity on timetable train number 1. Out.
So we should have 5 whistles and 5 bells. Let's check those out. Here's the default whistle. And let's check out the 5 bell tones. Here's the default bell. And here's some of the crew talk sounds.
Engine to dispatcher. Air's up, the crew's on board. Are we clear? Over. Please hold at your location. Out. Safeties are lifted. Ease off the coal till we get a signal. Dash bands are empty. Train orders say holding the siding until 44 clears, and we can take the main. You should be through any minute.
Dr. Train 1 to the train crew, 110 pound brake is released. Brakeman copies, brake release, brakeman out.
All right, we're going to move it out, and I'm going to be pulling the Lionel Strasburg passenger cars that I got a while back. They're still waiting on number 90, but for today, we'll run them with number 31.
Engine to dispatcher. Air's up, the crew's on board. Are we clear? Over.
You're clear to proceed east. Out. out and going to beans. Out.
All right, there you have it. Lionel's new 060 steam locomotive. This thing is great, and even better with the addition of that swinging bell. That made me so happy when they did that, and like I said, it really made the difference in me buying this or not buying this. If you'd like to pick one of these up, the retail price is right at $800, which in this day and age actually isn't that bad. And keep in mind that's the full retail price. If you go through a good Lionel dealer, you should be able to get a bit of a discount off that retail price. And as always, if you're looking for a good Lionel dealer, try my favorite train store, which is Legacy Station. You can find them on the web at legacystation.com or give them a call at 770-339-7780. If you'd like to support this channel, I would greatly appreciate it. That can be done through Patreon at patreon.com/ericstrains. Patreon supporters get access to all sorts of perks and benefits, and you can read about those benefits on my Patreon page. I'd like to put a big thank you out there to all of my current Patreon supporters. Your support means the world, not only to me, but to the future of this channel. And an extra super big thank you goes out to my premium tier Patreon supporters. You'll see their names at the end of this video. And finally, if you'd like to buy some Eric's Trains merchandise, if you look below this video, you should see a listing of some Eric's Trains stuff. If you click on those, it'll go to my store, and there's all sorts of stuff there. T-shirts, cups, phone cases, the works. Yeah, so check out that online store when you can. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm Eric Siegel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Now, don't misunderstand me. I love MTH, but let's be grown-ups. Let's be realistic. The wireless infrared tether system is more dependable than MTH's connection system for the simple fact that the wireless system has no physical connection between the locomotive and the tender, whereas the MTH system does. And when you have a physical connection, you have a greater chance of something going wrong. That's just reality.